The cabin lights hummed softly, casting a dim glow over the rows of passengers settling into their seats. The Boeing 777 thrummed beneath them, engines purring like restrained lions, and outside, the morning sun was just starting to splash gold across the tarmac. Among the passengers, she sat quietly in 14A, a woman in her early 40s, her brown hair tied in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Her eyes, a calm shade of hazel, stared blankly at the seatback screen in front of her. To anyone glancing her way, she was ordinary, too ordinary, some might have thought. She adjusted her scarf, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and leaned back against the headrest. Her hands rested on her lap, and she exhaled slowly, masking the tension coiled in her chest. Around her, people chatted, fidgeted, and scrolled endlessly through their phones. Children kicked at seats, flight attendants called out safety instructions, and the low drone of the engines became a comforting background rhythm. She blended into all of it, invisible in a sea of strangers, and yet there was an edge to her. She wasn't just another passenger. Her name was Dr. Alina Voss, though few knew it. Today, she wasn't a civilian researcher or a guest lecturer flying across the country. Today, she was someone the U.S. Air Force hadn't seen in years. A name that sparked whispers in secure hangars and command centers. A call sign that carried weight, fear, and admiration. One that could make seasoned pilots stop mid-breath. A call sign so secret that only a handful of people would ever speak it aloud. Nightshade. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, collecting trash and offering beverages. Alina accepted a bottle of water with a polite smile, tucking it into the side pocket beside her. No one knew, and she intended to keep it that way. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the cockpit door, though she quickly looked away, pretending to check her phone. The metal bulkhead there had been the stage of her past life, the place where adrenaline, danger, and precision had been her constant companions. But that was a long time ago, or at least that's what she tried to convince herself. As the aircraft began its ascent, a subtle tension threaded through the cabin. Overhead compartments rattled, a child cried, a man muttered complaints about turbulence. But Alina's focus was elsewhere. She traced the seam of the seat in front of her with a fingertip, her mind replaying fragments of a life few remembered. Classified missions, coded communications, late-night reconnaissance flights over hostile airspace. And above all, the moments when her call sign, Nightshade, had been more than a name, it had been a warning. The flight attendants did their final checks, and the plane leveled off into the sky. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching the dust motes in the cabin air, turning them into glittering specks. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the engine hum, letting herself sink into a rare moment of peace. But peace was a fragile illusion. She could feel the air around her tense, subtle vibrations in the seat that only someone with her training would notice. It was then that the first sign appeared, small, almost imperceptible. In the row behind her, a pair of men in nondescript flight jackets shifted their attention in her direction. At first, she ignored them, thinking perhaps she was imagining it. But the subtle recognition in their posture, the faint tilt of a helmeted head as though they were confirming an instinct, told her otherwise. These weren't ordinary travelers. Her instincts flared. Alina's gaze flicked to the reflection in the window. The two men had badges clipped discreetly to their jackets, their movements precise, measured. Not soldiers, not tourists. Fighter pilots, she realized, the type who flew with precision and watched with an intensity that could read nerves through layers of body language. Her stomach clenched. Could it be? Her heart rate, trained over decades to remain calm in the cockpit, betrayed her for a fraction of a second. Her fingers tapped a silent rhythm against the seat arm, a subconscious release of tension. She had trained for situations far worse than this, but the unpredictability of recognition, being spotted, identified, was something no amount of preparation could fully neutralize. Meanwhile, the cabin continued its orchestrated chaos. A mother soothed her infant, a businesswoman scrolled through emails, and the flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency. Yet Alina felt the invisible thread of awareness tightening around her, linking her to the two men behind her. It wasn't until one of them, a tall man with a shaved head and square jaw, leaned slightly to whisper something to his companion that her mind snapped into action. The words were soft, but clear to her trained ears, almost a private code between pilots. "Nightshade," he said. The word hit her like a thunderclap, though her exterior remained calm. Her pulse surged. The recognition wasn't theoretical, it was real. They knew. The F-35 pilots, airmen she had once flown alongside, colleagues in missions so classified they didn't officially exist, had spotted her. And she had no idea why they were here, why they were on this civilian flight. Her mind raced, cataloging possibilities. Were they here for a warning, a message, or worse? She had thought leaving that life behind meant leaving all its dangers behind as well. But here, in the mundane hum of a commercial flight, her past had caught up. She glanced at the two men again, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. One of them was checking his watch, then looking out the window. The other's gaze returned to her, piercing, assessing. The word nightshade had been uttered, but the consequences, the reason, remained unknown. A chill ran down her spine, sharp and insistent. Alina exhaled slowly, forcing herself to maintain composure. Her fingers released the armrest, her posture shifting to something casual, though every muscle remained primed. Years of training had taught her that exposure, even a fleeting recognition, could cascade into danger. And if these men were truly who she thought they were, the tension between past and present could escalate in seconds. She felt the urge to speak, to break the invisible wall of secrecy that had hung around her life for so long. But instinct screamed restraint. Not a word. Not yet. As the plane cruised above the clouds, she thought about the years since her last mission. The careful reconstruction of a quiet civilian life, the illusion of invisibility, the painstaking avoidance of old contacts. All of it had led to this moment. A single word, spoken in passing, that threatened to unravel everything. And yet she couldn't shake the curiosity burning inside her. Why were these F-35 pilots here, thousands of feet above the earth, whispering her secret call sign in a crowded cabin? Was it coincidence, a strange alignment of circumstances? Or had someone from her past orchestrated this encounter, deliberately and with intent? Her eyes flicked toward the window again at the endless expanse of clouds stretching below, deceptively serene. A part of her, the part that had once thrived in danger, that had learned to dance on the edge of risk, felt a surge of excitement, tempered by the steel of caution. She had flown in combat zones, she had evaded radar, she had faced adversaries who wanted her gone. She could handle this. She had to. But just as she settled into this fragile calculation of possibilities, a subtle vibration ran through the plane. The passengers stirred, some uneasy, others oblivious. Alina's trained eyes caught the change in the pilot's posture behind her, a hint of alertness, a signal she had learned to read in milliseconds. Something was about to happen, something that wasn't just ordinary turbulence or cabin noise. Her fingers curled lightly around the armrest. The hum of the engine seemed to deepen, resonating with the tension coiling inside her. The world outside the small oval of the window seemed unchanged, a cloudscape stretching endlessly, but inside the cabin time had contracted. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance from the men behind her carried weight. And then, almost imperceptibly, the taller man shifted again, leaning closer, his voice low, carrying a word she hadn't expected but had trained her whole life to anticipate. "Nightshade, we need you." Alina froze. The plane continued its steady climb, oblivious passengers chatting and scrolling, the mundane world pressing against the edge of something extraordinary. But in that moment, in 14A, she knew one undeniable truth. The past she had thought she left behind had found her. And whatever awaited her next would change everything, forever. End of Part 1. The suspense builds with the recognition of her call sign, leaving readers desperate to know why the F-35 pilots are reaching out, what her secret past entails, and what will happen next. If you want, I can continue part 2, escalating the tension as she decides whether to engage with the pilots and revealing the stakes of her secret life. Do you want me to continue to part 2 now? You said. Continue part 2, 1200 wards. ChatGPT said. Here's part 2 of your story, keeping the cinematic tension and suspense consistent with part 1, around 1200 words. Alina's heartbeat pulsed like a drum in her chest, steady yet urgent. She forced herself to breathe slowly, masking the storm that roared beneath her calm exterior. The words from the man behind her, "Nightshade, we need you," echoed in her mind, a summons from a life she thought had ended years ago. Every muscle in her body, honed through decades of training, stiffened instinctively. She wasn't just a passenger now. She was the subject of a tension that could shift the balance between chaos and control. The F-35 pilots remained in the row behind her, their postures almost casual but deliberate, like predators testing the waters before striking. Alina's eyes flicked toward the aisle, measuring the distance, considering possibilities. Their movements were silent but precise, subtle communications flowing between them that only someone trained in aviation combat protocols could interpret. Her pulse quickened. They weren't here to flirt with coincidence. They were here for a reason. Memories she had buried resurfaced in fragments. The long nights on classified missions, flying over hostile territories, executing maneuvers so precise that even radar operators blinked in disbelief. The code names, the classified channels, the pressure of life-or-death decisions compressed into milliseconds. And above all, the name Nightshade, whispered in corridors of secrecy, always carrying weight. Now that name had crossed into the ordinary, over the hum of a commercial airliner. Alina's mind raced through scenarios. Was this a recall, a warning, or a trap? She couldn't tell, and her instincts screamed caution. She adjusted slightly in her seat, leaning subtly toward the aisle, a calculated move that kept her both visible and guarded. Her hand brushed the strap of the small leather bag at her side, a bag she hadn't opened in years, but which still contained tools and devices from her former life, relics of operations that never officially existed. The taller pilot leaned closer again, his voice low, but carrying a weight that penetrated the noise of the cabin. "Nightshade, we have a situation. They're coming for you." Alina's stomach clenched. The phrase was simple, almost mundane in its construction, yet the implications were immediate, brutal. They? Who were they? And why now? She had thought she had left threats behind, thought the passage of time had blurred her enemies into shadows. But there was no mistaking the gravity of that tone, the calculated, restrained urgency of someone who had flown jets capable of Mach speeds and survived. Her mind flickered across memories she'd carefully compartmentalized. Operations deep inside adversary territory. The intel she had collected. The lives that depended on her judgment, every second weighted by stakes so high ordinary people couldn't comprehend them. If the words behind her meant what they seemed to, she was once again on the precipice. The cabin hum of the 777 contrasted sharply with the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Around her, passengers remained oblivious. A child gurgled in delight, a businessman tapped his laptop keys with mechanical efficiency, and a flight attendant asked a man in row 15 if he wanted tea or coffee. Yet beneath the veil of normalcy, Alina sensed the undercurrent of danger, subtle but unyielding. The taller pilot leaned closer, speaking so quietly that a casual observer would have missed it entirely. "You need to come with us. No questions, no explanations. The people after you, they're not leaving anything to chance." Alina's mind flicked between options like a radar sweep. She could comply, but the stakes were opaque. She could resist, but the precision and calm of these men suggested they would not leave the matter unresolved. Every fiber of her body screamed that this wasn't a casual encounter, it was a pivot point. Her past, concealed for so long, had intersected with the present in a collision that could not be ignored. Her eyes scanned the cabin again. She needed to gauge the environment, understand potential escape routes, and assess any civilian interference. A sudden movement, a cough, a bag dropped, any of these could complicate the situation. She noted the subtle shifts in body language around her. A man in row 16 glancing nervously at his phone, a mother adjusting her child's seatbelt, a window shade flicking up to catch the sunlight. All ordinary, all irrelevant, yet any moment could become critical. Alina's instincts, honed for combat and crisis, kicked in fully. She had spent years reading situations, predicting outcomes before they unfolded. Every variable, every microexpression, every sound became data points. The taller pilot observed her now, nodding her calculation without a word, understanding that the decision she was about to make would set the trajectory of what came next. Time seemed to dilate. The low hum of the engines, the distant rumble of the landing gear retracting, even the occasional squeak of the seats, all became background to the focused tension that gripped Alina. Then, another subtle signal from the pilots. The other one, shorter with a square-jawed intensity, tapped the side of his helmet and glanced at her in a silent, urgent prompt. They were ready for action, but the parameters remained unknown. Alina exhaled slowly, calculating. One choice: engage and follow them, risking exposure but potentially gaining control of the unknown threat. Another choice: remain passive, blending with the passengers, relying on the assumption that secrecy and normalcy might protect her. Her mind replayed the countless scenarios she had once run during simulations and real missions, scenarios where split-second decisions determined life or death. And then she made her move. Alina leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but deliberate. "I'm coming," she said, barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of command she had cultivated over decades. The two pilots exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod. The taller one motioned subtly with his head toward the rear exit of the plane, an unspoken invitation and warning. They weren't going to lead her to comfort. They were leading her into danger, and only one path would guarantee survival: speed, precision, and trust in instincts long dormant. She adjusted her bag over her shoulder, fingers brushing against the leather's hidden compartments. There were items inside that no ordinary traveler carried, tools of a life that had demanded secrecy, ingenuity, and ruthless efficiency. She wasn't unprepared, far from it. Passengers continued to chatter, oblivious to the tension that had erupted behind them. Flight attendants smiled politely as they passed, unaware of the undercurrent threading through 14A. Alina's eyes met the taller pilot, again, and in that brief, charged glance, the unspoken message was clear. The next few minutes would determine everything. Her breath steadied, heart pounding yet controlled. The plane continued to cut through the sky, clouds like white cliffs rushing past the windows. She moved with deliberate calm, rising from her seat, letting the cabin think she was simply stretching. Every step, every subtle gesture was a calculated measure of control. Then, just as she reached the aisle, the shorter pilot leaned closer and whispered again, almost too softly to hear. "They know you're here, and they're already on the plane." Alina froze mid-step, a cold spike of realization piercing her carefully maintained composure. The ordinary had vanished. Every instinct she had, every shred of experience, told her this was no accident, no coincidence. Danger had materialized silently, invisibly, and it was closing in. The passengers remained blissfully unaware, trapped in the bubble of mundane routine, as the threads of a deadly past began to weave themselves into the present. Alina's mind raced. She needed to identify the threat, understand the players, and act, but she couldn't reveal herself yet, not fully. The taller pilot's eyes met hers again, unwavering. The command in his gaze was undeniable. Time had collapsed into a single, razor-sharp point of decision. Every second from now on would demand perfection, speed, and absolute clarity. One wrong move could mean catastrophe, not just for her, but for everyone on this flight. And then it happened. A sudden movement near the rear of the cabin, subtle yet unmistakable. A shadow crossing the aisle, a figure who didn't belong, a presence that carried intent. Alina's pulse jumped. Her voice was calm, controlled, deadly in its quietness. "They're here." The F-35 pilots froze slightly, their instincts kicking in, weapons and strategies already forming in milliseconds. Alina's mind aligned with theirs, decades of training and experience converging in the small space of the airplane cabin. The calm facade of a commercial flight had shattered. The ordinary world had vanished. And in the next heartbeat, Alina Voss, Nightshade, would have to confront the ghosts of her past, head-on, above 30,000 feet in the air with no room for error. Alina's gaze snapped toward the rear of the cabin, every muscle taut. The movement she had noticed earlier had shifted again, a dark figure weaving carefully between rows, eyes scanning, calculating. It wasn't a careless passenger or a crew member performing routine duties. This was someone trained, deliberate, someone who moved with intent that had survived battles far from these soft cabin walls. The F-35 pilots behind her mirrored her focus. The taller one's hand brushed lightly against the seatback in front of him, fingers grazing what looked like a concealed panel on his flight suit. His eyes never left the intruder. The other pilot, shorter, steeled his stance, ready to react instantly. They didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. Every micro-movement, every subtle signal carried meaning. Alina felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, sharp, intoxicating. Her training, long dormant, roared back to life. Years of covert operations, clandestine reconnaissance, and high-stakes maneuvers came flooding in. She had faced far worse than this, but the confined space of a commercial airliner changed everything. No room for evasive flight, no cover, no high-tech jet systems to give her an advantage. Here, every decision had to be perfect. Every second counted. The shadowy figure paused near row 20, seemingly assessing the cabin. Alina's mind raced. How many others were involved? Were they armed? Their objective? Capture? Elimination? The ambiguity gnawed at her, and she instinctively ran through contingencies. She could engage directly, distract, signal the pilots, or wait. Timing would be critical. A single misstep could trigger panic, endangering hundreds of lives. She subtly shifted, letting her eyes meet the taller pilots. The briefest nod passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. He understood what she needed, even before she decided. That was the language of trust forged in combat, forged in situations where lives depended on precise, unspoken coordination. The intruder moved closer to row 15, glancing toward the cockpit door. Alina's mind processed every detail. Flight attendants in the aisle, passengers immersed in their own worlds, oblivious to the danger threading through the cabin. The man's posture suggested someone skilled, trained. This was no random threat. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing, and they knew her. Alina's hand brushed lightly over her leather bag, fingertips grazing the hidden compartments she had long sworn never to use. Inside were tools of her past, devices, communications intercepts, gadgets capable of more than just ordinary defense. She hadn't thought she'd ever need them again. Yet here they were, waiting like ghosts of a former life. The intruder reached the midpoint of the aisle and paused. Their gaze swept the cabin, lingering for a fraction too long. Alina recognized that look, the way someone searches for a specific target while masking intention. It was precise, calculated, the same expression she had seen countless times in hostile airspace, on missions where seconds determined survival. She leaned subtly toward the aisle, pretending to adjust her bag. The movement was deliberate, calculated, designed to draw just enough attention without revealing full intent. The intruder's head snapped slightly toward her direction. Recognition. They had found her, or at least sensed she was the target. The taller pilot shifted slightly, brushing a hand against a panel on his flight suit. Alina caught a glimpse, a slim device, probably a signal jammer or a non-lethal tactical tool designed for confined spaces. Every microdetail mattered, and she registered it instantly. Together, they were assessing the threat, preparing for engagement, and she was the critical link in the chain. Her mind worked in rapid calculations. Distraction strategies, containment zones, civilian safety protocols, potential escape routes. Every option carried risk. She couldn't afford mistakes. Every passenger, every piece of cabin furniture, every tight corner could become an obstacle or a weapon. Suddenly, the intruder moved again, this time subtly adjusting their approach, angling toward the window side. Alina's heart raced. She had to act. Every muscle coiled, every sense heightened. And then, almost reflexively, she triggered the first part of her plan. She shifted in her seat, lightly nudging the backpack strap in a deliberate motion. A small, almost imperceptible sound, a coded signal only the F-35 pilots could recognize, vibrated through the cabin. It was a trigger. She watched the taller pilot respond almost immediately, his hand flicking a switch on his suit, sending a micropulse that temporarily disrupted the intruder's electronic scanning devices. A brief distraction, but it was enough. The intruder paused mid-step, head tilting slightly, sensing the anomaly. Alina seized the moment. She rose swiftly, sliding along the aisle with controlled precision. The motion was smooth, calculated, and she moved with the agility of someone who had spent years navigating both machinery and danger. Passengers glanced up, startled by the sudden movement, but Alina's calm demeanor prevented alarm. Her eyes never left the intruder. Her bag shifted to her front, concealing a device that could create temporary blinding flashes, non-lethal, but highly effective in confined spaces. She didn't want to harm anyone, but she had to control the situation. The shorter pilot mirrored her motion, moving silently toward the back, keeping a discreet distance, positioning himself to intercept if needed. Their coordination was seamless, unspoken, forged in the crucible of past missions where split-second decisions determined life or death. Alina's gaze locked on the intruder. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow. She saw the determination in their eyes, the calculated precision of someone who had been trained, and perhaps augmented, to succeed at almost any cost. Her stomach clenched. Whoever they weren't ordinary operatives. This was professional, methodical, and relentless. Then, unexpectedly, the intruder paused and spoke, voice low, carrying over the hum of the engines. "Nightshade, we were told you'd never surface again." The words hit Alina like a physical blow. Recognition, yes, but also a hint of something more. Not just awareness of her identity, but a personal message, a confirmation that her past was not only remembered but actively monitored. She realized that the scope of her exposure was greater than she had imagined. Someone or something had tracked her movements, predicted her flights, and now orchestrated this encounter. Her pulse accelerated. She adjusted her stance, calculating next steps, a distraction, a defensive maneuver, or an immediate engagement. Every choice carried consequences, but hesitation could be fatal. She could feel the cabin's confined space pressing in, each row a potential obstacle or advantage, depending on her execution. The taller pilot's voice, low and precise, reached her just enough to break the mental tension. 3 seconds, Alina, get ready." Her mind whirled, syncing with his timing, translating decades of instinct into a split-second strategy. She understood immediately. Whatever happened next, she had to move first, move decisively, and maintain control of the environment. Her fingers brushed a device in her bag. Small, compact, capable of emitting an intense flash to disorient the intruder just long enough for the pilots to act. She weighed her options in the heartbeat before action became imperative. Then a subtle shift in the intruder's weight betrayed their intent. They were about to strike. Alina exhaled sharply, focusing entirely on precision. Every calculation, every move, every measure of control converged in a single decisive moment. She was Nightshade, and for decades she had survived by moving first, thinking fast, and trusting instincts honed under pressure few could endure. The cabin seemed to narrow, the hum of the engines fading into silence in her awareness. All that mattered was the next second, what she did, what the intruder did, and whether hundreds of lives above 30,000 feet would remain intact. And then it began. Alina's pulse was a drumbeat echoing in her chest as she assessed the intruder. Every second stretched, every detail amplified. The cabin felt suddenly too small. The passengers, oblivious to the storm unfolding near, rose away. She tightened her grip on the device in her bag, a compact flash emitter, one of the few non-lethal tools she had kept from her nightshade days. In this confined space, precision and timing were everything. The intruders' movements were deliberate, controlled, almost casual in their menace. They stepped closer, eyes scanning for a vulnerability, for a moment of hesitation. But Alina was a master of reading intentions, honed through decades of life-or-death missions. She had evaded threats far more deadly, navigated corridors filled with uncertainty, and manipulated situations where a single error meant catastrophic consequences. The shorter F-35 pilot positioned himself subtly behind the intruder, a silent anchor, while the taller pilot moved toward the rear exit, anticipating a possible escape attempt. They were synchronized in a way that only combat-trained professionals could be, an unspoken choreography of survival and precision. Alina's mind raced through contingencies. Every option had a cost. Every second mattered. The intruder's voice sliced through the hum of the engines, low and taunting. "Nightshade, thought you could hide forever, thought you could erase yourself from the equation." Alina's jaw tightened. This wasn't a random operative or a hired thug. This was someone intimately aware of her past, someone who understood the magnitude of her skills and the danger she represented. The revelation hit her like an electric shock. The reach of those pursuing her was far greater than she had imagined. They weren't just on the plane, they had meticulously orchestrated this encounter. She forced herself to breathe, every inhalation measured, every exhalation controlled. Panic had no place here. Hesitation was a liability. She shifted slightly, angling her body so she could move with fluidity along the aisle. Her hand rested lightly on the flash device, ready to activate at a moment's notice. The intruder made a subtle move, a step forward, a shift of weight that triggered Alina's instincts instantly. Timing was everything. She pressed the device and a blinding, controlled burst of light erupted. The intruder jerked backward, blinking violently, disoriented. The shorter pilot acted immediately, sweeping in with fluid precision, his hand closing around the intruder's arm. A struggle ensued, brief but intense, and Alina moved with calculated calm, positioning herself between the assailant and the passengers. Every action, every decision, was a chess move played at the speed of a heartbeat. Passengers glanced up, startled, some rising instinctively, but Alina's voice cut through, calm yet commanding. "Stay seated, do not move." Her words were precise, carrying authority without revealing the full scope of danger. The intruder fought against the shorter pilot's grip, but the coordination and training of the two F-35 pilots quickly neutralized the threat, forcing the intruder to the floor. Alina's gaze swept the cabin, her mind racing. She had achieved temporary control, but she knew this was far from over. Whoever had orchestrated this encounter had contingencies in place. This intruder was only the first wave. The taller pilot's eyes met hers across the aisle, a brief flicker of acknowledgement passing between them. "Move," he whispered, voice low, urgent. Alina understood immediately. They needed to isolate the threat, contain it, and prepare for what would come next. She moved down the aisle with deliberate calm, her posture composed, her bag secured. The intruder's struggle had been brief but revealing. This person wasn't just after her. They had intelligence, resources, and a clear objective. As she reached the rear of the plane, the intruder attempted one last desperate lunge, but the shorter pilot intercepted, subduing them with precise efficiency. Alina's eyes scanned the figure, noting details. The sharpness of their movements, the subtle traces of specialized gear, the intensity in their eyes. This wasn't a random attack. It was targeted, methodical, personal. Her mind raced. Who was behind this? Who had orchestrated her exposure after years of careful concealment? She thought of every mission, every adversary, every coded communication she had ever been part of. The list was long, but the timing. Why now, above 30,000 feet on a civilian flight? The intruder's eyes flicked toward her, recognition and defiance burning within. Alina felt a surge of adrenaline, a reminder of why she had been called Nightshade. She had faced threats that seemed insurmountable, navigated life-or-death situations with nothing but skill, instincts, and nerves of steel. And now, that past had collided with the present in the most confined, dangerous environment possible. A commercial airliner, filled with innocence, moving at hundreds of miles per hour with nowhere to run. The taller pilot spoke again, his voice low but firm. Containment secured for now, but there may be others. They know you're here and they won't stop. Alina's heart skipped. Others. The implications were staggering. The controlled chaos in her mind sharpened. Whoever had sent this intruder was not just persistent, they were organized, informed, and willing to escalate. The thought sent a chill down her spine, yet it was tempered by the adrenaline that surged through her veins. She had survived far worse. She could survive this. She crouched briefly beside the intruder, keeping her body between them and the aisle, her eyes locked on theirs. They met her gaze with a mixture of defiance and calculation, as though testing her, measuring her readiness. Alina recognized the look immediately. It was the same intensity she had faced in high-stakes confrontations across continents, in missions that demanded absolute composure and split-second judgment. The shorter pilot adjusted his grip on the intruder, keeping them subdued but careful not to cause injury. Alina's mind worked in rapid calculation. Neutralize the immediate threat, safeguard the passengers, assess potential accomplices, prepare for escalation. Every decision had consequences, every second mattered. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint vibration ran through the plane. Not turbulence, something else. A signal, a presence, an alert. Alina's trained senses flared. The intruder's gaze shifted slightly toward the front of the cabin, awareness dawning. "They're here," Alina whispered to herself, voice barely audible, though the weight of it carried through her mind. The taller pilot's eyes sharpened, scanning the cabin. His jaw tightened and he gave a subtle nod to Alina. She understood immediately. The intruder was not alone. Someone or something was moving through the plane, observing, waiting. The tension coiled tighter, the stakes higher. Alina rose slowly, moving along the aisle with calculated precision, her bag at the ready, her mind parsing every possible scenario. The passengers remained largely oblivious, caught in the illusion of ordinary travel, while the hidden battle unfolded around them. She caught the intruder's eye once more. Their defiance had not waned, yet a flicker of uncertainty crept in. Alina knew this was a pivotal moment. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated Nightshade. A sudden clatter echoed from the rear of the cabin, a dropped bag, a startled passenger reacting instinctively, and Alina's reflexes snapped into overdrive. She pivoted, calculating trajectories, positioning herself between potential hazards and the intruder, ensuring no one else could be harmed. The taller pilot's voice cut through her concentration, calm yet urgent. "Stay sharp, the others are moving." Alina's mind raced. Others. They were already here. The confined space of the aircraft became a battlefield in her imagination, every row of seats a potential obstacle or defensive advantage. Every passenger, unknowingly, became a variable. Her hand rested on her bag, ready to deploy the next phase of her plan. She had survived impossible odds before, relied on instinct, intellect, and training to outmaneuver adversaries who underestimated her. And now, high above the clouds in the hum of a commercial airliner, that life or death skill set was about to be tested again. Alina exhaled slowly, calming the storm within. Her eyes scanned the cabin one last time before settling on the aisle. The intruder, subdued but dangerous, remained aware, their gaze tracking her every movement. The tension was electric, palpable. And then, from the very front of the plane, a subtle shift. The faintest hint of movement, almost invisible, caught her trained eyes. Another player. Alina's pulse surged. Whoever this was, they were skilled, deliberate, and closer than anyone could imagine. She instinctively crouched slightly, bag in hand, ready for the confrontation she had known was inevitable but had hoped to delay. High above 30,000 feet, Alina Voss, Nightshade, realized one undeniable truth. The storm had only just begun. The plane hummed through clear skies, clouds gliding like silent sentinels beneath its wings, but inside the tension was a living, breathing force. Alina Voss, Nightshade, crouched low in the aisle, bag secured, eyes locked on the subtle shift near the front. Her instincts screamed that the second wave of the threat had begun. Her pulse was steady, her mind razor-sharp. Every decision from this point onward could be the difference between life and death for everyone aboard. Passengers remained largely oblivious, their chatter a fragile barrier against the chaos threading through the cabin. A mother adjusted her infant, a man yawned while reading a report, a young woman dozed in row 12. Alina's awareness of the human variables was acute. Any sudden movement from the intruders could trigger panic, and panic could cascade into catastrophe. She had trained to manage high-stress environments with civilians involved. This was a skill she had honed in evacuation simulations and real-life crises. The taller F-35 pilot moved with fluid precision to the front, scanning each passenger as if reading their intent. Every row became a calculated zone, every glance a potential warning. Alina's eyes flicked along the aisle, noting pockets of space that could serve as defensive advantage points. Her mind, operating on hyperalert, began assembling a tactical map, intruder positions, potential civilian hazards, and escape routes. The faintest sound, a shift of weight near the cockpit door, snapped her attention forward. Another intruder, a figure smaller, quicker, more agile, had emerged. Unlike the first, this one didn't hesitate. Their eyes locked on Alina for the briefest moment, recognition flaring like a silent spark. They had been briefed, informed, and this encounter was personal. Alina's mind raced through options, splitting the flow of possibilities into calculated scenarios. Engage directly or manipulate the environment, distract or neutralize. Her fingers brushed her bag, her hand hovering over the compact devices inside. Tools she hadn't imagined using for years suddenly became vital. Precision was the only currency here. She was Nightshade, and she had trained to survive situations where the ordinary world seemed incapable of holding her. The intruder lunged, fast, aiming to push through the cabin's chaos. Alina pivoted instinctively, sliding along the aisle with grace and precision, using the compact flash emitter from her bag. A brilliant burst of light temporarily disoriented the figure, just enough for the shorter pilot to intercept. The intruder went down, but Alina noticed immediately, a flash of intelligence behind their eyes, a silent signal that more would come. She exhaled, assessing the temporary calm, but her instincts screamed. The threat was far from contained. She was acutely aware that whoever orchestrated this had resources, precision, and intent. They were playing a deeper game, one that had only begun to unfold at 30,000 feet. Her attention flicked to the subdued intruder near the rear. Their defiance remained, their eyes flicked toward her and the pilots with controlled hostility. Alina realized that these operatives were not just agents, they were hunters, trained and equipped to pursue her specifically. She crouched momentarily, sliding her hand over a concealed compartment in her bag. Inside, she withdrew a small device designed to emit a high-frequency signal capable of disorienting electronic systems nearby. In the tight confines of the aircraft, this would create a window of advantage, disrupting any communications or devices the intruders might carry. The taller pilot's voice, low and urgent, reached her ears. Secondary threats confirmed. Front of the cabin, be ready. Alina's pulse quickened, but her movements remained controlled. Every motion was deliberate. She slid along the aisle toward the midpoint, using passengers and seat rows as visual barriers. Her eyes never left the front. She needed to maintain situational dominance while protecting the civilians who had no idea their flight had become a battlefield. Suddenly, the smaller intruder regained composure, lunging again with precise calculation. Alina ducked instinctively, the movement fluid, almost preternatural. She activated the device, a high-frequency pulse that sent the intruder staggering, disoriented. The taller pilot intercepted immediately, subduing the figure with precision. Alina's mind raced. One wave neutralized, but the signal from the device had hinted at more. Someone, or multiple someones, were orchestrating this beyond the visible cabin. She needed to understand who, why, and how fast they could act. Her gaze swept the cabin, calculating distances, angles, and potential zones of conflict. She noticed subtle cues: a shadow near the service cart, a passenger's foot brushing oddly against a bag, a movement too deliberate to be accidental. Her pulse surged as she realized the threat might be embedded, blending seamlessly among civilians. The taller pilot caught her eye, nodding once. "We're running low on time. They've anticipated patterns." Alina understood immediately. Whoever was after her wasn't improvising. They had studied her, anticipated moves she had thought were private. Her anonymity, the quiet life she had built post-Nightshade, was now irrelevant. She had no choice but to escalate. She slid to the back again, crouching by the subdued intruder. The eyes that met hers were calculating, defiant, yet a flicker of recognition crossed their features. They knew she was formidable, but they were committed to the mission, whatever it was. Alina assessed quickly: restraint or escalation. She chose controlled escalation, using her compact device again to emit a brief flash of intense light toward the intruder's peripheral vision. The figure staggered, and Alina seized the moment, guiding them toward a temporary containment spot near the rear bulkhead. The shorter pilot reinforced the hold, ensuring no escape while maintaining safety. A moment of calm, barely a heartbeat, settled over the aisle. Alina exhaled slowly, recalibrating, but the faintest vibration ran through the plane, a subtle hum, almost electronic, almost imperceptible. Her eyes narrowed. The intruders were connected. Someone was orchestrating this remotely. The realization hit like ice water. The threat extended beyond the visible cabin, beyond even the plane itself. The taller pilot's eyes mirrored her concern. He whispered just enough for her to hear: remote coordination could be more than one team. Alina's mind whirled. The scale of the operation was larger than anticipated. Multiple operatives, coordinated action, precise timing. Whoever was behind this had anticipated her moves, studied her habits, and designed contingencies for every possible response. Her eyes flicked to the cockpit. She realized the pilots might need to assume control of communications, but the threat could reach even there if the intruders were skilled enough. She had to act fast, decisively. She crouched low again, bag in hand, calculating the next move. Precision, timing, coordination, the principles that had carried her through countless missions. Her mind split seconds into probabilities, each one assessed with meticulous care. The intruder's eyes met hers again. Defiance had not diminished. Determination burned. And Alina recognized something more: respect, grudging and raw. They knew they faced someone exceptional, someone who had survived beyond expectation, someone who had earned the call sign Nightshade. Then, almost imperceptibly, a small alert flashed on her bag's device, a preset signal. She hadn't used it in years, not since her last mission. The signal meant extraction, coordination, imminent escalation. The message was clear: the operation was about to reach its peak. Alina exhaled, calm yet resolute. The confined cabin was a pressure cooker of danger, adrenaline, and precision. Every decision from here would cascade into outcomes far beyond her immediate control. And yet, she was ready. High above 30,000 feet, Alina Voss, Nightshade, prepared to confront the unfolding storm. The first waves of the attack had been neutralized, but the operation had only just begun. The enemy was patient, organized and relentless, and the next move would decide the fate of the passengers, the plane, and perhaps her own survival. Her eyes flicked once more to the rear intruder, then to the pilots. The air between them was charged, taut, ready to snap. And then she made the decision. Alina's breath was steady, but every fiber of her body vibrated with awareness. The first waves of intruders were contained, but the subtle alert from her device confirmed what she had feared. The operation wasn't over. The enemy was organized, coordinated, and patient. Someone, or multiple people, were orchestrating every move with precision, and they had already infiltrated the environment far more deeply than she had anticipated. The confined cabin amplified every sound, every motion. The low hum of the engines, the faint squeak of seat hinges, the shuffling of feet, all became tactical cues. Alina's eyes flicked across the rows of passengers, each ordinary face masking potential chaos. Panic had to be prevented at all costs. A single scream, a sudden movement, could turn this high-altitude standoff into catastrophe. She had trained for life-and-death situations in open combat zones, but the stakes here were amplified by dozens of innocent civilians trapped in a speeding metal tube. The taller F-35 pilot shifted slightly, maintaining a visual on the cockpit while simultaneously scanning for threats among the passengers. His eyes met Alina, conveying a single unspoken message. The next phase was critical. The intruders were likely coordinated with operatives closer to the front, perhaps even in the cockpit area. Every movement had to be precise, every second optimized. Alina's mind raced, evaluating scenarios. The enemy would attempt to create chaos, force mistakes, or exploit even the smallest hesitation. She had to anticipate their next moves before they happened. Years of combat had trained her for this, anticipating intent before it became action, predicting trajectories in milliseconds, and calculating outcomes under extreme pressure. Her eyes shifted back to the subdued intruder at the rear. The figure's eyes flicked toward her, a mixture of fear and defiance, calculation and recognition. They knew she had the upper hand, yet they still carried the training and intent to act if opportunity arose. Alina recognized that level of controlled focus. It was the same intensity she had faced countless times in operations that didn't exist on any public record. Then a subtle vibration pulsed through the cabin, almost imperceptible but familiar to trained ears. The taller pilot's hand brushed his suit as he acknowledged it, and Alina felt a cold spike of realization. The intruders weren't merely acting independently, they were coordinated remotely. Signals, communications, perhaps even tracking devices. Whoever orchestrated this operation had real-time oversight. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with the calculated thrill of someone fully alive in the crucible of danger. Alina pressed a button on her device, sending a countersignal to disrupt electronic coordination. A low hum followed, subtle but effective. For a fraction of a second, the intruder's posture faltered, their precise timing thrown slightly off. Alina seized the moment. She moved down the aisle with calculated speed, her body a study in control. Each step was measured, precise, her eyes locked on both the intruders and the passengers. She could not afford any errors. She had to maintain dominance, protect the civilians, and anticipate the next moves. The smaller intruder attempted another lunge, this time aiming to break toward the cockpit. Alina reacted instantly, using the compact flash device to disorient them. The light was blinding in the cabin's confined space, causing the figure to stumble, giving the shorter pilot the opening to intercept. Within moments, the second intruder was restrained. Alina's mind didn't pause. 2 waves neutralized, but the alert signals indicated more. Others were en route, potentially inside the plane, potentially closer than anyone could detect. The operation was bigger than she had anticipated. Whoever was orchestrating this had resources, patience, and intent that extended beyond the visible threats. The taller pilot whispered, low and precise, "They're coming for the cockpit. Prepare for entry." Alina's heart skipped. The cockpit, the heart of the plane's operation, was a critical vulnerability. If the intruders reached it, control of the aircraft could be compromised. She needed to act immediately, and the window of opportunity was vanishing fast. Her eyes scanned the aisle, calculating angles, distances, and timing. She had to create a barrier, slow any approach and buy precious seconds. She crouched slightly, ready to deploy her last tactical device, a small, non-lethal device capable of temporarily incapacitating anyone in close proximity with a sonic pulse. It was her final contingency. Then movement caught her attention, a figure near the front of the cabin, masked, deliberate, trained. Not just a random passenger, not someone improvising. This was the orchestrator's hand in real time, a direct agent poised to strike. Alina's pulse surged. The game had escalated. She activated the sonic pulse, a controlled, targeted burst. The figure stumbled, momentarily disoriented. The taller pilot moved in sync, intercepting the operatives and keeping them away from the cockpit. Alina's coordination with the F-35 pilots was seamless, a dance of instinct, experience, and trust forged over years of high-stakes operations. Her mind flicked to the passengers. They were unaware of the storm unfolding around them, blissfully ignorant of the danger threading through their flight. Panic could erupt at any moment. Alina adjusted her stance, positioning herself to shield civilians while keeping control over the intruders. Then she heard it, a subtle sound, faint but unmistakable. From overhead, a comlink activated. Someone was coordinating, sending instructions, observing. The operation had layers, depth, reach. The stakes had shifted. She was no longer dealing with isolated intruders. She was facing a coordinated assault, fully aware of her capabilities, intent on neutralizing her. Alina's eyes met the taller pilots once more. They understood the unspoken reality. The mission had evolved. It was no longer just defense. It was counteroffensive, precision control, and survival. Every second would demand instinct, intellect, and courage. The first intruder at the rear shifted subtly, testing their containment. Alina's eyes narrowed. No mistakes. She signaled subtly to the shorter pilot, guiding him to reinforce the hold while keeping a buffer from passengers. Every movement was precise, every micro-adjustment calculated. A sudden shift near the cockpit caught her attention again. Another operative, faster, stealthier, attempting to breach the flight deck. Alina's pulse surged. She moved, intercepting the approach with a combination of speed, force, and tactical precision. Her body reacted as it had thousands of times before, muscle memory, instinct, and strategy converging into one fluid motion. The operative staggered, disoriented, and the taller pilot acted immediately, intercepting and containing the threat. Alina's eyes swept the aisle again, scanning, calculating. The plane was still airborne, civilians oblivious, yet danger coiled around every corner, every row. She exhaled slowly, aware that she had temporarily contained the immediate threats, but the alert pulses from her device told her the operation was far from over. Whoever orchestrated this had deeper layers, further contingencies, and they would not stop until their objective, her capture or elimination, was complete. Alina's fingers grazed her bag, feeling the remaining tools inside. She had one final contingency, one final layer of defense for herself and the passengers. The stakes had never been higher, the battlefield more confined, the pressure more intense. She was Nightshade, and she had never failed when lives hung in the balance. Her eyes flicked to the cockpit. Every movement, every breath, every calculation pointed toward one inescapable truth. The enemy was relentless, sophisticated, and closer than anyone suspected. And the final phase of this airborne operation was about to begin. High above 30,000 feet in a plane filled with unaware civilians, Alina Voss, Nightshade, prepared to face the ultimate test of skill, courage, and survival. The storm had only begun. And she knew one undeniable truth. One mistake, one hesitation, and there would be no second chance. Alina's eyes flicked toward the cockpit. Every instinct screamed that the next seconds would decide everything. The intruders were coordinated, ruthless, and relentless. They weren't improvising. They had calculated every move, every potential response, every split-second action she might take. Her mind worked faster than the hum of the engines, parsing possibilities, calculating outcomes, preparing contingencies. The passengers remained oblivious, their mundane routines clashing violently with the high-stakes game unfolding around them. A subtle movement in the aisle caught her attention, a masked figure moving with lethal precision toward the cockpit. The taller F-35 pilot mirrored her awareness, hand brushing a concealed panel in his suit. He was ready to act the instant she gave the signal. Alina's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the familiar thrill of survival at the edge. The intruder paused mid-step, recognizing her gaze. Recognition flashed across their eyes, a combination of respect and determination. They had been briefed, trained, and prepared. This wasn't a spontaneous attack. This was professional, calculated, and personal. Alina exhaled, steadying herself. She had survived countless such confrontations, but never in a confined, civilian-packed airliner. Every move had to be flawless. She reached into her bag, fingers brushing against the last of her contingency devices, a compact, high-intensity blinding flare designed for close-range engagement. She had reserved it for moments like this, when immediate dominance was critical. Her hand hovered over the device, calculating timing, trajectory, and impact. Precision would determine survival, not just hers, but everyone's aboard. The intruder made the first move, lunging toward the cockpit. Alina reacted instantly, activating the device. A brilliant flash erupted in the aisle, temporarily disorienting the operative. The taller pilot lunged in perfect synchronization, intercepting with controlled force. The operative staggered, caught off guard by the combined precision and timing of the two trained pilots. Alina's mind flicked to the rear. The first intruders remained subdued but restless. She signaled subtly to the shorter pilot, reinforcing containment while keeping civilians unharmed. Every movement was a calculated measure of control, every second a vital thread in the tapestry of survival. Then, almost imperceptibly, she noticed a subtle vibration under the seat, another signal, another operative, closer than anticipated. Her pulse surged. Whoever orchestrated this operation had embedded agents within the civilian ranks. Panic couldn't be allowed to erupt. Calm precision was her weapon. She pivoted slightly, positioning herself between the potential threat and the passengers, eyes sharp, muscles coiled. The intruder at the front, recovering from the flash, lunged again. Alina ducked instinctively, pivoted, and deployed a controlled, low-level sonic pulse from her device. The figure faltered, disoriented, giving the taller pilot a split-second advantage to neutralize them. For a brief moment, the cabin fell into tense stillness. Passengers remained unaware, oblivious to the life-or-death dance unfolding just feet away. Alina's mind raced, calculating probabilities. She had neutralized immediate threats, but signals from her device indicated additional operatives were still active. The real challenge, the orchestration behind the attacks, was still in play. The taller pilot's voice, low and urgent, reached her. "They're coordinated, secondary teams embedded, cockpit is at risk." Alina's pulse surged. The cockpit, the control center, was vulnerable. She had to act immediately. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every memory of past missions converged into a single, coherent strategy. Speed, precision, and calculated risk were her only allies. She moved swiftly toward the front, using seat rows as cover, timing her steps with the humming engines. Her eyes scanned for the operative's signals, subtle movements, or miscalculations. She caught sight of a hand brushing against a panel near the cockpit, a sign of intent. Alina acted. With fluid, practiced motion, she swung her bag in a controlled arc, deploying a micro-flash device directly toward the operative. The light exploded in the confined space, disorienting them, while Elena and the taller pilot converged simultaneously, neutralizing the threat. The cockpit remained secure. For a moment the tension eased, but only slightly. Elena's device pulsed faintly again. Another operative was close, moving with stealth, almost imperceptible, blending among the passengers. She could feel the danger pressing closer, invisible yet palpable. Her eyes scanned the cabin. Civilians, oblivious to the chaos, continued their routines. Elena adjusted her stance, ready to act at a moment's notice. She crouched, moved, and deployed another subtle device, a sonic pulse calibrated to disorient, buy time, and maintain control. The intruder faltered, giving her and the shorter pilot the opportunity to intercept. As the figure collapsed into containment, Elena exhaled slowly, aware of the temporary calm. But she knew the operation was far from over. Whoever orchestrated this had deeper layers, backup contingencies, and intent that extended beyond the visible threats. Her gaze flicked to the pilots. Coordination, precision, and mutual understanding flowed between them without words. Every action, every decision, every micro-movement was synchronized. The confined aircraft had become a battlefield, and they were the only ones capable of maintaining control. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint alert pulsed through her device, another operative, undetected, moving toward the rear. Elena's mind raced. She calculated angles, distances, and timing. Every second was critical. The rear containment zone was secure, but the operative's intent was clear. Disrupt, create chaos, target her specifically. She pivoted, moving toward the rear with controlled urgency, her bag ready, her eyes sharp. The operative emerged from the aisle, swift, trained, precise. Elena activated her last contingency, a high-intensity sonic pulse designed for maximum effect in close quarters. The operative staggered, disoriented, and she and the shorter pilot moved in perfect tandem to neutralize them. The cabin was tense, still, and silent, an almost surreal contrast to the life-or-death ballet that had just unfolded. Elena's pulse gradually slowed, though her senses remained hyper-alert. She knew the operation's architects were still watching, coordinating, planning next moves beyond the visible plane. The taller pilot spoke quietly, tension etched in his features. "They know who you are, they've known all along, and they won't stop until they have you." Elena's mind raced. Recognition, respect, fear, determination. Whoever had orchestrated this knew the magnitude of Nightshade, knew her capabilities, and understood that she was not a target easily subdued. The stakes had escalated to their peak. Her eyes flicked to the cockpit. Every panel, every instrument, every movement of the crew was vital. She had to maintain control, anticipate hidden threats, and neutralize them before catastrophe struck. Her fingers brushed her bag, ready for further contingencies, aware that the final phase of this high-altitude operation was about to unfold. A subtle shadow flicked near the overhead bins, a final operative, faster, stealthier than the rest. Elena's pulse surged. This was the culmination, the apex, the test she had been preparing for in instincts, training, and decades of disciplined strategy. She crouched, aligning herself for the final confrontation. The shorter pilot mirrored her, ready to intercept. The taller pilot maintained control near the cockpit, eyes sharp, muscles coiled. Coordination, precision, and timing were critical. High above 30,000 feet in a plane filled with oblivious civilians, Elena Voss, Nightshade, prepared to confront the last wave. This was it, the ultimate test, where her past collided with the present, and where every skill, every instinct, every ounce of her resolve would be pushed to its limit. And she knew one undeniable truth. The next seconds would determine not just her survival, but the lives of everyone aboard. Elena's eyes locked on the final operative, a shadow among the seats, moving with predatory precision. Every instinct screamed danger. The plane hummed around them, oblivious passengers suspended in routine, while a life-or-death confrontation unfolded inches away. Alina crouched low, bag ready, muscles coiled like springs. Her mind calculated trajectories, reaction times, and probabilities with surgical precision. This was the culmination. Every skill honed over decades of clandestine operations, every mission she had survived, led to this confined aisle of a civilian airliner. The operative lunged, swift, trained, and lethal. Alina reacted instantly, swinging her compact flash device in a precise arc. The burst of light erupted, temporarily blinding the attacker, forcing a stagger that bought her a critical fraction of a second. She moved in, fluid and precise, intercepting them with a combination of controlled force and tactical leverage honed in countless high-stakes missions. The shorter pilot mirrored her motion, reinforcing the containment without endangering passengers. For a heartbeat, the cabin seemed suspended in time. The operative struggled, eyes flaring with recognition and disbelief. They had not expected her to respond so swiftly, so decisively. And in that brief moment, Alina saw it, hesitation, the first crack in their precision-trained demeanor. It was all she needed. With the last of her devices deployed, a carefully timed sonic pulse disrupted the operative's coordination entirely. They collapsed into containment, subdued, and Alina immediately secured them, ensuring they couldn't rise again. The tension in the cabin began to ease. The taller pilot exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself a fraction of relief. Cockpit secure, all immediate threats neutralized. Alina's gaze swept the cabin. Every row, every passenger, every detail had been accounted for. Panic had been avoided. No one had been harmed. The calm was almost surreal after the storm of seconds, but Alina knew better than to relax completely. Whoever orchestrated this operation was still out there, still watching, still calculating. She exhaled, letting the adrenaline ebb slightly, but her body remained taut. The passengers remained unaware, their lives intersecting with the extraordinary without knowing it. A child tugged at their mother's sleeve, a man yawned, a woman adjusted her headphones, all innocent, mundane, and blissfully unaware of the high-stakes confrontation they had just passed through. Alina moved along the aisle, checking containment, coordinating with the shorter pilot to ensure the subdued operatives were secure. Her mind ran through every scenario, ensuring there were no hidden devices, no overlooked threats. Precision was critical until every element of danger was definitively neutralized. The taller pilot approached her, voice low, edged with admiration. "You handled that flawlessly. I've never seen coordination like that in a civilian setting. You saved everyone." Alina nodded, but her eyes remained scanning. Praise was secondary to vigilance. She was Nightshade, trained to anticipate the unpredictable, and she knew better than to underestimate the unseen. Then a subtle movement in the rear caught her attention. A small figure, passenger, operative, or something in between shifted in the seat, glancing toward the containment area. Alina froze, muscles coiled, every sense alive. The potential threat was still alive, though minor. She advanced slowly, controlled, assessing. "Stay calm," she said softly, voice carrying authority without alarm. The figure froze, hands raised in instinctive surrender. Alina's eyes locked on them, and she realized it was an ordinary passenger, caught in fear, reacting instinctively. Relief surged, but caution remained. The cabin was tense, every heartbeat amplified. Minutes passed. Every remaining signal from her device faded. The orchestrated operation had been disrupted, neutralized, and contained. Alina finally allowed herself to exhale fully, shoulders relaxing, the intense pressure of the past moments beginning to recede. The taller pilot gestured toward the cockpit. "Flight crew is secure. Air traffic is clear. We can bring her down safely." Alina nodded, walking toward the cockpit, passing the rows of unsuspecting passengers, every one of them a reminder of the stakes she had navigated. Relief mingled with exhaustion, but her focus remained. Every detail mattered until the flight had safely landed. Once the cockpit door opened, the flight crew acknowledged her with wary relief. "We had no idea," one of them admitted, voice trembling slightly. "You saved us all." Alina allowed herself a brief nod. Words were secondary to action, and action had defined every moment of this ordeal. She had anticipated, neutralized, and controlled, a symphony of precision, executed under extreme pressure, in circumstances most could never imagine. The plane touched down smoothly, a controlled descent orchestrated by skilled pilots now free to focus entirely on the landing. As the tires kissed the runway, Alina felt a quiet satisfaction. Lives had been preserved. Chaos had been contained. The storm, which had seemed unstoppable moments before, was over. Passengers began to stir, some applauding instinctively, unaware of the invisible forces that had protected them. Alina stepped through the aisle, her eyes meeting faces filled with gratitude and confusion. She offered a reassuring smile, masking exhaustion and the weight of what had transpired. Outside, emergency teams and law enforcement were prepared, alerted by the pilots and her signals. They moved quickly to secure the plane, taking the subdued operatives into custody. Alina watched, satisfaction tempered by reflection. The operation had been orchestrated by an entity capable of precision and patience, a reminder that the world of Nightshade never truly left her, even when she tried to disappear. The shorter pilot approached, voice low, almost reverent. How did you anticipate everything?" Alina's gaze was distant, reflective, the weight of years evident. "I didn't anticipate everything. I survived because I had to, and because I never stopped thinking, never stopped preparing. That's what keeps people alive." The taller pilot nodded, respect etched in his features. "Nightshade, it makes sense now. The call sign, it wasn't just a name. It was a warning." Alina allowed herself a small, wry smile. "A warning, yes, but also a promise. I survive, I protect. That doesn't change." The authorities led the operatives away, and the passengers disembarked, still unaware of the full danger they had passed through. Alina followed behind, shoulders straight, posture composed, the quiet confidence of someone who had lived a lifetime in shadows, now visible in every controlled movement. Outside, the sun glinted off the tarmac, bright and almost surreal after the tension-filled flight. The sky was calm, indifferent, as if it had witnessed nothing. But Alina knew better. She had danced with chaos, navigated lethal threats, and emerged victorious. Nightshade was not a memory. It was alive, precise, and ready. The F-35 pilots fell into step beside her. The taller one spoke quietly. "You didn't just save the plane, you saved hundreds of lives. And yet, you move like it's just another day." Alina's eyes met theirs, calm, unwavering. Every day is a day to survive. Every moment is a chance to protect. The rest, the recognition, that's secondary. For a moment, the three stood together on the tarmac, survivors of an invisible battle that had raged high above the clouds. Alina allowed herself one final glance at the aircraft, a vessel that had become both battlefield and sanctuary, a symbol of precision, survival, and the delicate balance between chaos and control. Then, with quiet resolve, she walked away, blending into the ordinary world once more, leaving the extraordinary behind. The call sign Nightshade remained, a hidden force in the shadows, known to few, respected by those who had witnessed it in action, and feared by those who sought to challenge it. And high above the skies, in the silence that followed, the storm had ended. But the legend of Nightshade had only just begun.